8:41 a.m. local time. Inside Pakistan's diplomatic enclave, a secure line goes silent mid-sentence. A U.S. aide closes a classified folder marked with a red stripe. Nuclear compliance data, last updated 36 hours ago. The number inside hasn't changed. 5 to 577 kilograms. That's Iran's current estimated stockpile of enriched uranium. And here's the detail that matters. A significant portion of it, over 120 kilograms, is enriched to 60% purity. That's not civilian grade. That's not theoretical. That is one technical step below weapons grade. Signal number one. Because at that level, the timeline changes dramatically. Experts calculate that moving from 60% to 90% enrichment, the threshold for a nuclear weapon, can take as little as 2 to 3 weeks under optimal conditions. Not years, not even months, weeks. Here's what nobody is telling you. The talks happening in Islamabad are not talks in the traditional sense. There is no room where both sides sit across from each other, no handshake, no cameras, no joint statement. The U.S. delegation is located in a fortified compound near the red zone. The Iranian delegation is across the city, inside a secure residence controlled by Pakistan's intelligence services. Distance between them, approximately 8 kilometers. Communication method, physical courier only, no phones, no direct lines, no digital transfer. Every message is printed, reviewed, sealed, transported, and delivered by hand. And that means something critical. Speed is controlled, and control means influence, because whoever controls the flow of messages controls the tempo of the negotiation. At 8:53 a.m., the first message of the day leaves the U.S. compound, 4 pages, 12 paragraphs. One central demand: Iran must cap enrichment at 67% again. That number is not random. It comes directly from the 2015 nuclear agreement, the baseline Washington wants to return to. But here's the problem. Iran is no longer operating in that framework, not even close. And when the message arrives at 9:17 a.m. on the Iranian side, the reaction is immediate. One word appears in the margin: unacceptable. But it's not written in ink, it's written in pencil. That matters, because pencil can be erased. Signal number 2. There's still space, but here's the catch. Space doesn't mean agreement, it means delay. And delay can be strategic. By 9:42 a.m., a response is drafted. 3 pages, tighter language, sharper tone. Iran's position is clear. No return to previous limits unless sanctions are lifted immediately, not gradually, not conditionally, immediately. And that's where the negotiation locks, because Washington operates on sequencing. Step 1, Iran reduces enrichment. Step 2, inspections increase. Step 3, sanctions are lifted. Tehran reverses that order completely. Sanctions first, everything else later. 2 frameworks. 2, mutually incompatible. And that's why these talks are failing. But here's the catch. Failure might not be failure. Because out in the Persian Gulf, the USS Abraham Lincoln is currently operating at Condition 3 readiness. Its air wing includes FA-18 Super Hornets, armed with precision-guided munitions. 2 destroyers, USS Sterett and USS William P. Lawrence, are conducting overlapping patrol patterns near the Strait of Hormuz. That narrow stretch of water handles roughly 20% of the world's oil supply. If it closes, even partially, the impact is immediate. Oil doesn't rise gradually, it spikes. $150, $180, possibly $220 per barrel within days. That's not speculation. That's what officials are saying privately. And if that happens, the chain reaction begins. Global markets drop, inflation surges, energy costs skyrocket, and suddenly, a failed negotiation becomes a global economic crisis. That's the real pressure point, not just nuclear risk, economic shock. By 10:11 a.m., the courier makes his second trip of the day. No markings, no escort, just another vehicle blending into Islamabad traffic. Inside his briefcase are 2 documents, one official, one modified. And this is where things begin to shift, because the courier is not just a messenger, he's an interpreter, a filter, a decision maker in disguise. And at 10:34 a.m., when the Iranian response reaches the U.S. side, one key phrase has changed. Immediate sanctions removal becomes accelerated sanctions relief. One word difference. Immediate versus accelerated. But that single change transforms the entire tone. Signal number 3. Suddenly, the proposal looks flexible, negotiable, possible. But here's the catch. That flexibility may not exist in reality, because the original Iranian document still demands immediate action. And if that version is the one enforced back in Tehran, then this perceived progress is an illusion. By 11:02 a.m., social media begins to react. Anonymous accounts leak fragments of the negotiation. Breakthrough likely. Deal within reach. Sanctions relief under discussion. Markets respond instantly. Oil dips slightly. Defense stocks stabilize. But these leaks are not confirmations. They're signals. And signals can be manipulated. Inside Washington, officials are already preparing two separate narratives, one for success, one for failure, both written in advance. Because in modern diplomacy, perception matters as much as outcome. By 11:48 a.m., a new development emerges, unexpected. A message from a third capital, Tel Aviv, unofficial, indirect, but unmistakable, concern. Because Israel views the current trajectory differently, for Washington, delay is useful. For Israel, delay is dangerous. Every day without limits brings Iran closer to a threshold that cannot be reversed. And that introduces friction, not between enemies, between allies. But here's the catch. That friction is not public, not yet. It exists in private channels, but in quiet conversations, in intelligence briefings that never reach headlines. By 12:26 p.m., the talks enter their fourth exchange cycle. Documents are shorter now, edits more precise, but the core disagreement remains unchanged. Enrichment levels, sanctions timing, verification protocols, each one a breaking point. And beyond the rooms in Islamabad, the consequences are already mapped out. If talks collapse completely, Israel accelerates strike planning. Target list includes Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan. These are not surface facilities, they are hardened, buried, protected. Some estimates place Fordo under more than 80 meters of rock. Neutralizing it would require bunker-busting munitions and repeated strikes, not a single operation. A sustained campaign, and campaigns escalate. Iran responds. Missiles launched, drones deployed, proxy forces activated across the region. The Strait of Hormuz becomes contested. Oil surges past $200. Global markets react violently. The S&P 500 drops 12 to 15% in under 48 hours. Gas prices spike worldwide. Supply chains tighten. Inflation returns. And suddenly, this is not just a regional conflict, it's a global crisis. But here's the catch. If the talks don't collapse, if they simply stall, the timeline changes. Escalation slows, not stopped, slowed. And that slowdown is enough. Enough to prevent immediate war. Enough to stabilize markets temporarily. Enough to create the illusion of control. And sometimes, that illusion is the strategy. By 1:14 p.m., the courier makes another trip. This time, the documents are reduced to 2 pages. One sentence stands out. Interim agreement under strict verification. That's new. An interim deal, temporary, 6 months, maybe 1 year. A freeze, not a rollback. Iran keeps its centrifuges, keeps its stockpile, keeps its infrastructure. It simply pauses. And that changes everything. Because a pause preserves capability. It doesn't eliminate it, it delays it. But here's the catch. A delay compresses future risk. Because when the pause ends, everything resumes. Faster, more intense, more dangerous. By 2:03 p.m., both sides are reviewing the interim proposal. No agreement, but no rejection. Ambiguity remains, and ambiguity is useful. Because as long as talks continue, escalation is postponed. At 2:47 p.m., the courier receives final instructions. One more delivery, then stop. Pause everything. Create distance. Because sometimes the most powerful move in diplomacy is inactivity. And as the sun begins to set over Islamabad, the outcome remains uncertain. No deal, no collapse, just a fragile pause. But behind that pause, preparations continue. Military planners update scenarios. Intelligence agencies monitor signals. Allies reassess positions. Because everyone understands what comes next. The next 24 to 72 hours, that's the window, that's the decision point. Either the talks move forward, slowly, imperfectly, buying more time, or they break, completely. And if they break, the chain reaction begins. Orders are issued, forces move, targets lock. And once that starts, it doesn't stop easily. So the real question is no longer whether the talks succeed. It's whether they delay what comes next. Because right now, behind closed doors, in rooms without cameras, and conversations without transcripts, one decision is being weighed. Continue, or collapse. And within the next 72 hours, that decision will define everything. Peace, or war. At 3:12 p.m., as the final courier run of the day begins, a second layer of communication activates, one that never appears in official records. A parallel channel, quiet, unacknowledged, but real. Signal number 4. Inside a secure office 2 blocks away from the main U.S. compound, a secondary team reviews incoming summaries. Not the official drafts, not the signed pages, but interpretations. Tone analysis. Behavioral shifts. Because in indirect diplomacy, what is said matters less than how it is delivered. And today, something has changed. The Iranian responses are arriving faster, not by hours, by minutes. That suggests pre-approval, which suggests alignment. And alignment inside Tehran is rare. But here's the catch. Alignment doesn't mean agreement with Washington. It means agreement internally. And that's a different kind of signal entirely. Because when factions inside Iran align, even temporarily, it usually happens for one of two reasons. Either they see an opportunity or they see a threat. By 3:28 p.m., intelligence analysts flag a second anomaly. Satellite imagery over central Iran shows increased activity near the Fordo fuel enrichment plant. Vehicle movement, personnel rotation, nothing overtly aggressive, but not routine either. And that introduces a new variable. Because while diplomats exchange words in Islamabad, centrifuges continue to spin in Fordo at roughly 1,000 RPM, thousands of them, each one refining uranium hexafluoride gas into higher purity material. Each rotation bringing the timeline closer. Weeks, not months. That's the current estimate, and that estimate is driving decisions far beyond Pakistan. By 3:46 p.m. in Washington, a closed-door briefing begins inside the Pentagon. The numbers presented are precise. If Iran crosses 90% enrichment, breakout capability becomes immediate. Weaponization could follow within 6 to 12 months, depending on design choices. Delivery systems already exist. Shahab-3 missiles. Range, approximately 2,000 kilometers. Enough to reach regional targets, enough to alter the balance completely. Signal number 5. Because at that point, diplomacy doesn't just become harder, it becomes irrelevant. But here's the catch. Iran hasn't crossed that threshold. Not yet. And as long as it hasn't, there is still a window, a narrow one, measured not in months, but in decisions. By 4:05 p.m., the courier arrives back at the Iranian compound with the final U.S. response of the day. 1 page, 8 sentences. Stripped down, direct. It introduces a modified interim proposal, a 6-month freeze on enrichment above 20%, in exchange for limited sanctions relief, specifically access to approximately $10 billion in frozen assets. Not full relief, partial, controlled, reversible, and that structure is deliberate because it gives Washington flexibility. If Iran complies, relief expands. If Iran deviates, relief is withdrawn. But here's the catch. From Tehran's perspective, reversible relief is not relief at all. It's leverage. And leverage cuts both ways. By 4:22 p.m., the Iranian team reviews the proposal. There's no immediate rejection, no immediate acceptance. Instead, there is silence. And silence in negotiations like this is not neutral, it's tactical. Because silence forces the other side to wait, to wonder, to reassess. And during that silence, something else happens. The third person in the room makes his move. He adjusts the framing of the proposal, not the content, but the emphasis. He highlights the $10 billion figure, downplays the enrichment cap, reorders the priorities, and in doing so, he changes how the offer is perceived, not officially, but psychologically. And perception shapes decisions. That's the part most people never see. By 4:47 p.m., a response begins to take shape, but it's not written immediately. Because inside the Iranian system, no decision of this magnitude is made in isolation. It requires consultation, layers of it, political leadership, security apparatus, religious authority, each with its own priorities, each with its own red lines. And that's where internal friction becomes decisive. Because while diplomats in Islamabad may lean toward compromise, hardliners elsewhere are calculating something very different. They're not asking what deal is possible. They're asking what deal is acceptable. And those are not the same question. Signal number 6. Because one faction sees economic relief, the other sees strategic constraint. And when those two views collide, decisions stall. By 5:18 p.m., the sun is lower over Islamabad. Shadows stretch across the compound walls. The pace slows, deliberately. No new messages are sent, no statements released. Just a pause. But beneath that pause, the system is active. Back channels open, allies consulted, options recalculated. And in those calculations, the chain reaction remains central. If talks collapse tonight, escalation begins tomorrow, not immediately. But predictably, Israel increases readiness. Air Force units shift to forward positions. Refueling tankers are placed on standby. Strike packages are finalized. And once that process reaches a certain point, it becomes difficult to reverse. Because military momentum has its own logic, its own timeline, and it does not wait for diplomacy. But here's the catch. Washington is not aligned internally either. Inside the administration, there are two competing views. One argues for patience, extend talks, delay decisions, avoid escalation at all costs. The other argues for pressure, tighten sanctions, increase military presence, force a decision. And that internal divide mirrors the one inside Tehran. Two systems, both divided, both uncertain, both aware of the stakes. By 6:02 p.m., a new piece of information enters the equation. A leak, not from Islamabad, from Europe. It suggests that a parallel diplomatic effort is underway. Quiet consultations with European intermediaries, exploring a broader framework beyond the current talks. Longer timeline, wider scope, more actors. And that introduces a new possibility, that these talks are not the final negotiation. They're a holding pattern, a bridge to something larger. But here's the catch. Bridges can collapse, and if this one does, the fall is immediate. By 6:37 p.m., the Iranian response is finalized, 2 pages, carefully worded. It does not accept the interim deal, but it does not reject it either. Instead, it proposes adjustments, higher sanctions relief, shorter verification timelines, greater flexibility on enrichment levels. In other words, movement, not resolution, and that's enough to keep the process alive, for now. By 7:05 p.m., the final message of the day is delivered. The courier places the document on the table, steps back, waits. Because even at this stage, delivery matters, timing matters, presence matters. And as the U.S. team reviews the response, one thing becomes clear. The talks have not failed, but they have not succeeded. They are suspended, in motion, balanced between outcomes. And that balance is fragile, because beyond the negotiation rooms, the clock continues. Centrifuges spin, missiles remain fueled, ships stay deployed. Nothing has stopped, everything has only slowed. And slowing is not the same as solving. That's the reality no one wants to say out loud, because a slowdown buys time. But it does not eliminate risk. It postpones it. And postponed risk has a way of returning. Stronger, faster, less predictable. By 8:12 p.m., Islamabad begins to quiet. Convoys depart. Lights dim. Security tightens. But inside the compounds, activity continues. Because the next phase is already being prepared. The next round, the next exchange, the next decision. And that decision is approaching faster than it appears, because the window is narrowing. Measured now not just in enrichment levels, but in political tolerance. In Washington, patience has limits. In Tehran, flexibility has limits. In Tel Aviv, waiting has limits. And when those limits are reached, decisions accelerate, not gradually, suddenly. That's how escalation happens. Not as a slow build, but as a rapid shift. A trigger. A moment. And once that moment arrives, everything changes. So as April 19th, 2026 comes to a close, the situation remains unresolved. No deal, no collapse, just a fragile continuation. But behind that continuation lies a narrowing path, a path that leads in only 2 directions. Because in the next 24 to 72 hours, one of 2 outcomes will emerge. Either the talks produce an interim framework, imperfect, temporary, but enough to hold the line, or they fail. Completely. And if they fail, the chain reaction begins. Plans move from paper to action, forces shift from readiness to deployment, decisions move from discussion to execution. And once that transition starts, it does not reverse easily. That's not speculation, that's what officials are saying privately. So the real question now is not whether a perfect deal is possible. It isn't. The question is whether an imperfect one is enough. Enough to delay, enough to stabilize, enough to prevent what comes next. Because what comes next is not theoretical. It's planned, it's prepared, it's waiting. And within the next 72 hours, the world will find out which path is chosen. Deal or no deal, delay.